The Egyptian government threatened a tough clampdown on a general strike on Sunday. Skyrocketing food prices over the last months have led to calls for open protests in the streets. But can harsh measures alone solve snowballing economic problems in Egypt? This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm Imran Garda. It began as a workers' strike against poor pay and rising food costs. Today, it's turned into a nationwide protest with internet bloggers urging Egyptians to stay home and skip work. But police contained the workers' strike at the country's largest state-run textile factory. And now it seems the calls for protests across Egypt have run out of steam. Mohammed Shukair has more.
It never really materialized. But the plan for a nationwide strike in Egypt did accomplish one thing: official alarm. The government threatened tough action against anyone who took part, organized, or incited any form of public protest. Although most of the officially registered opposition parties have stayed away from the strike, it's not clear who exactly is behind the call for the nationwide movement. It has caused quite a stir, prompting the government to deploy large security forces in central Cairo and other cities. The plan to strike is a strong sign of social unrest. Food prices are on the rise and public services are falling apart. The gap between the struggling Egyptians and their government is widening, with about 40% of Egypt's population living below the poverty line. No light is expected near the end of this dark economic tunnel.
Even anger, people cannot express that openly. This is unbearable. People are expressing their anger in any way they can.
These people see the government as incapable or unwilling to act. They say that this situation makes the impoverished or struggling majority wonder who represents them. The government says it's doing its best to combat the current economic crisis. But the opposition groups claim the government is mainly worried about the rise of any leadership that can claim to represent the people and that manages to mobilize enough support on the streets to undermine the legitimacy of the ruling regime. They interpret this as the only explanation for the massive security measures taken by the authorities, the arrest of dozens of opposition leaders, and the very strongly worded warning issued by the Ministry of Interior. Mohammed Shukair for Inside Story.
Well, joining us now are our guests in Cairo, Maged Rida Boutros. He's a member of the Policy Committee of the ruling National Democratic Party. Also in Cairo, Rabab Al-Mahdi. She's a political activist and assistant professor at the American University in Cairo. And on the phone from Kiev, Saad ad-Din Ibrahim. He's the head of the Ibn Khaldun Center for Development Studies and a professor of political sociology. Welcome, all of you, to the program. Mr. Boutros, if I could start off with you, do you think the strikes have failed?
I believe much so, because I'm working in one of the public universities. Most students show up. The faculty were there. The university was working at least 90% of its full capacity. I believe that the call for protest failed. Many people realized that they had political agenda apart from the economic problem that Egypt is facing nowadays. Egypt, let's admit, faces a part of the global economic problem. A recession is hitting everywhere, including Egypt.
Well, sorry to interrupt you, but we're getting reports. Sorry to interrupt you. We're getting reports that the only reason the strike may be perceived to have failed is because police intimidated people to stop them from striking.
I would say for two reasons. The first, the nature sympathized with the organizers because there is a large sandstorm has hit Cairo since early morning at dawn, let's say. The second reason is that people knew very much that it's against the law, it's a violation of the law. If you want to go on protest, you have to get a permit. Nobody applied for a permit. It's against articles of the law, so it's a violation, a clear violation. The Egyptian government cannot afford for Egypt to go in a chaos. it's in a turbulent region. So Egypt makes sure that it ensures and guarantees safety and security for its own people. So it cannot afford to let people go on riots.
So, Mr. Boutros, you feel the price would be chaos. I'd like to pose this to Rabab Al-Mahdi. Rabab Al-Mahdi, do you agree with Mr. Boutros?
Of course, I disagree. I mean, we're on two opposite poles of the spectrum. He belongs to the NDP, and I definitely mobilize against the NDP. I mean, this whole idea, what Mr. Magid just said is the rhetoric that Mubarak regime and all his disciples have been using. The idea that whenever there is political mobilization, whenever there is pluralism and liberalization, this leads to chaos and the use of regional dynamics around the Middle East.
So you believe you were successful?
I'm sorry. Of course. I mean, under the authoritarian context we're talking about, if Mr. Magid have been talking about universities, if he hasn't heard about a demonstration of more than 2,000 students at Hilwan University, then he's been missing on the news. And on the other hand, if he hasn't been seeing all the armored cars and the thousands of security, state security everywhere around Cairo, reminding me actually of the Israeli invasion of Gaza, then he's been missing a lot of the picture.
Let's bring in Saad. Okay, sorry to interrupt you. I want to bring in Saaduddin Ibrahim over the phone from Kiev. Let's broaden this out a bit, Mr. Ibrahim. Have the opposition used the plight of the ordinary workers to score political capital against the state?
Well, of course, this is a public issue. Rising prices, inflation, corruption, whatever you call that. Is that a social issue? Is it a political issue? A cultural issue? People are fed up with this regime. People have heard platitudes and excuses for the last 25, 26 years, and they're just simply sick and tired of it. With my due respect to Mr. Boutros, I have heard him speaking at least 10, 15 times, and he repeats the same thing. Egypt is okay, Egypt is doing well, the government has to do this, but no results. He has been echoing, repeating the same excuses for the last God knows how many years. Anyhow, what really is happening in Egypt today is a continuation of a trend that began with Kifaya a few years ago, and that is to break the fear barrier. Because every demonstration in Cairo, there are always 10 security elements that come into the street. So what the organizers of this strike did this time is very imaginative, using the cell phones, using the internet, using bloggers. They ask people to stay home, ask the students to stay home. And if they go to place of work, to have a work stoppage, even symbolically, for a few minutes, for an hour, for 2 hours, in order to get their message across to the official, to the government, to the regime, and to the world. And the very fact that the government used threats and put tens of thousands of soldiers in the squares and the public places in Cairo and other major cities shows that despite claims that the strike has failed, yet the government is so concerned, so panicky that it has to do this. And I think the Egyptians so far, over the last year and a half, there has been over 1,000 strikes, 1,000 sit-ins, and it is to the credit of the Egyptians that they have never used violence.
All right, let me bring in Mr. Boutros here. Sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Ibrahim. Mr. Boutros, do you want to respond to that? Mr. Ibrahim says this is just merely an example of people being fed up with the regime.
Nobody can deny that we face economic problems. I said in the beginning, Egypt faces economic problems. We do admit it. We commit mistakes. No government whatsoever did not commit mistakes. We strive to solve those problems. But I cannot nag all the time complaining. You have, as an opposition party or a faction of the opposition to offer solutions. It's not enough to complain all the time, especially when you are convicted by the law that you are part of a conspiracy against Egypt.
Do you believe that the Muslim Brotherhood is making the most out of these protests?
We do believe it's not only we do believe, they have admitted that they are part of it. They organize it. They have political agenda for those protests. They want to make the government in a very bad position. They want to make the society in a chaos, in an unstable condition, so that they have an allegation that the government cannot keep peace and stability in Egypt, so they can take over. That's the main idea. We face problems. We strive to offer solutions. The bread problem is about to be solved. It's gradually being solved. The government shows some effectiveness in solving their problems. We don't complain all the time without offering solutions. What are the solutions of others? Let's listen to them.
I want to talk a little bit about the mode of communication in calling for the strike and bring in Rabab Al-Mahdi, because some analysts have said that when you look at the mode of communication, Facebook and internet blogs, this is a very sort of bourgeois form of communication. One wonders, is there not a fundamental disconnect between those calling for the protests and those actually on the ground, the poor Egyptians who are actually suffering from the economic woes?
Okay. First, you have to understand that the call for the protest actually came from the ground. The bourgeois communication you're talking about is something that happened later. The first people who talked about a strike and actually chose that date were the workers of Al-Mahalla. The Egyptian governorate, and they were the ones who decided, and later on the bloggers and political activists of different shades to which the Muslim Brotherhood actually have not contributed, and I would like to correct this to Mr. Maged. The Muslim Brotherhood have not endorsed the call for a general strike or protest today and have not joined in those protests. However, the call originated from Al-Mahalla and by the workers of Al-Mahalla for their deteriorating working and living conditions. It was later picked up by different political factions, by different workers, by different groups of the marginalized, who have actually endorsed it. I mean, they stopped the strike in Mahalla, but there was a demonstration of more than 7,000 people, of which they arrested more than 500, including women and children. Some of them have been critically injured and are in the hospital. In Cairo, they arrested more than 150 activists from their workplaces, from off the streets, from their homes. If this is a regime that wants to see solutions and wants to see alternatives, the first thing they should do is to allow people to express themselves, not to take them in dozens, whether the workers of Mahalla or the activists of Cairo and the other governorates.
All right, gentlemen and Ms. Mahdi. Okay. Sorry to interrupt you, Ms. Mahdi. Gentlemen and Ms. Mahdi, stay with us. It is time for a short break. But before that, we asked some of the protesters on the streets of Cairo why they gathered and whether they consider this action as a successful strike. This is what they had to say.
We are here to declare our demand for a public protest. The ruling regime in Egypt and the ruling party realize the difference between Egypt under their rule and Egypt led by the true Egyptians. Today, Egyptians are on strike everywhere, in the trade unions and universities. We reject the ruling party and President Mubarak. We prepare for a general rebellion in the country despite all the security heavy-handed approach and the mass arrests of opposition leaders. This will not deter us, because the average Egyptian is more aware of the facts and they insist on demanding their basic rights.
I think that the strike is a success because this is the first strike to encompass all of the country. The call was for people to stay home, and I crossed Cairo from east to west to downtown, and the crowds were very sparse compared with regular days. This is the beginning of the downfall of the government. Just look at how the Ministry of Interior filled the streets with its troops. It is a sign of panic.
I love to have a decent life, without fear, terror, or irrespect of the human dignity. Should I fall, I will remain dignified, and my blood be that of freedom. We thought that much more people will take part in the strike that was due to take place in Tahrir Square, and not in the Bars Association. People are still gathering around, but I do not know how many people will join the demonstration. This cannot be a strike. People thought that a strike means that they would stay at home. That is why very few people will join the demo.